Hey everybody, Jason Blaha here with Ice Cream Fitness. Just sitting here again in my robe, drinking my morning coffee. And I had someone send me a private message on bodybuilding.com and asked me to address the subject of what is skinny fat and should these people be bulking or cutting. Hold on, let me give you guys a couple poses first. As these pose. Okay, on to the subject of skinny fat and what is it. Skinny fat is generally people who have generally been fairly sedentary. You know, their general hobbies. You know, they sit around play a lot of World of Warcraft or Diablo 3 or whatever. They're not very physically active. They don't have very much muscle mass when they early on in their training when they start out because they've been fairly sedentary, but also because they've tended to be sedentary and eat a few surplus calories here and there. They tend to carry a little extra body fat. They're a little pudgy around the waistline. They're not truly, fat or obese because they're generally at a light body weight, but they carry a little extra body fat. And it's hard for these individuals sometimes to determine if they need to bulk or cut when you're skinny fat. And I mean, a skinny fat person, an example might be someone who's, 5'8", 5'9". They're starting at 150 or 155 pounds, but they're, 18, 19% body fat with love handles and a little bit of a, couple inches of pudge on the front of their stomach. Whereas, normally it's easy for us when we see the skinny kid who's, 5'11" and 140 pounds and his ribs are showing, we tell him to bulk. We actually tell him to dirty bulk. Go ahead and just put on weight. And also, when you see someone who's, on the BMI scale, they're starting out, and maybe they even carry a decent amount of muscle because most obese people tend to carry a little more muscle mass than skinny people. But anyone who's, obese on the BMI scale, they're 25% plus body fat. I mean, they have a gut. Obviously, we tell those people they need to cut before they do their first bulk. So it really gets tricky, when you deal with the skinny fat person because one they want to get cut because they don't want the fat to be there. They want nice abs, they want to be aesthetic, but they also have no muscle mass. And so there's this confusion there, and we see posts on it on forums and things all the time. And my advice to that person is generally to go ahead and do a clean bulk. And the reason for that being they have no foundation. It's like Arnold, the great Arnold Schwarzenegger said, you can't chisel a pebble. And so generally what happens, they don't have anything to cut up. So when you take a guy like that, who's, he's got 13-inch arms, he goes on a 6-month cut. Yeah, he might get down to, 9 or 10% body fat and start to have some abs showing, but he ends up with 11-inch arms or 12-inch arms when he's done, and he looks like a fucking toothpick. If you cut when you're skinny fat, the end result, you're going to look more like a concentration camp victim, or you're just going to look skinny. You're not going to look fit. You're not going to look aesthetic. No one's going to look at you and think that you work out. So, I mean, you've actually done a lot of work and not really gotten anything for it. Instead, that person, I would recommend, again, the doing a clean bulk or a lean bulk, and I'll link my video right up here above. Explaining the difference between different types of bulks and how to plug your calories in for those. And that person's probably going to want to follow around a 10% surplus. I would also recommend them get on a good, heavy, progressive barbell routine. There's a number of good ones out there. I've also written a program for the novice lifter, and they would probably do well on that. And I will link that right here also. Okay, and generally what you see with that, these people, they don't want to bulk at all because they're usually scared of gaining extra body fat. And in my experience, what often happens, because this person is usually a bit of a noob, they can still make some good noob gains. They can still sometimes lose a little body fat while they're gaining muscle, just due to the better nutrient partitioning of becoming very active and doing intense training. So sometimes this person who started at, 155, 150 pounds, under 55 pounds, over the course of gaining 15 or 20 pounds of muscle, sometimes they end up being, 15% body fat at the end of their bulk, just due to nutrient partitioning. Whereas in somebody who's more advanced, that will never happen. But, someone who's fairly early on, they're carrying far less muscle mass than they should. They're fairly new to training. Oftentimes you see that. Or what you end up seeing is that they put on such a minimal amount of fat on the bulk, depending on what they eat, that they end up at the same body fat percentage, 20 pounds heavier. They might do the bulk for 8 or 9 months, and go from 150 to 170 pounds and end up at the same body fat percentage because that their muscle and fat gain ended up being in proportion. And at the end, when they're carrying another 20 pounds of muscle, they look leaner than when they started, even though they've gained body fat, just because their muscles are thicker and fuller. There's, the fat is then dispersed more over the muscle bellies, with the same amount of fat or just a small increase, and they end up looking more defined at the end of their bulk. And then when those same guys, they do that, they gain 20 pounds of muscle, then they go on a cut and they lose, 8 to 10 pounds of fat over a few months. They end up with a product that's just so much better. The end result ends up being a much better physique than they would have gotten had they tried to tinker with a cut or a true recomp or a slow cut or something like that. They just end up looking so much better, and the end result is just more aesthetic, leaner, bigger, and better than they would have been using other methods. So yeah, the skinny fat guy, I would always tell them do a lean bulk. I would stay, at around a 10 to 15% surplus, get on a good progressive barbell overload routine. And what you'll generally find is that if you're skinny fat, you'll either recomposition a little bit if you do this, or you will only gain such a small amount of fat in proportion with the muscle that you're gaining that you end up looking leaner than when you started due to all the extra muscle mass. Then you would have, you end up looking leaner than where you started, even though you're actually carrying more fat. And that's really all I have to say on that today. Hold on, let me give you guys another pose. And I'll talk to you next time.